garbage bag with my clothes and told me the truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. "We only adopted you for the government money," my mother said, calculator in hand, fingers moving across the keys like she was tallying up 18 years of profits. $1,500 a month, Colton. You've been a reliable income stream, but now that you're 18, the checks stop coming. My name is Colton Reed, or at least that's what I've been called for 18 years. The woman speaking to me is Beverly Reed, the only mother I've ever known. She's 52, works as a bank teller, and apparently views me as a financial investment that just matured. Sitting next to her, avoiding eye contact like he always does during confrontations, is Harold Reed, my adoptive father. He manages inventory at a hardware store and has taught me everything I know about fixing engines, though I'm starting to realize those lessons were probably just to keep me busy, not because he cared. "You're joking," I said, my voice barely working. "This is March 15th, my birthday. You're seriously telling me this on my birthday?" Harold shifted in his chair, the same wooden chair where he'd sat for 18 years of silent dinners. "The adoption subsidies end when you turn 18. That was always the deal." "The deal?" I felt my legs go weak. "I'm your son. I'm not a deal." Beverly looked up from her calculator for the first time. Her gray eyes were as cold as they'd always been, but now I understood why. "No, Colton. You were a ward of the state that we agreed to house in exchange for compensation. We fulfilled our contractual obligations. Food, shelter, education. The contract is now complete." She stood up, walked to the corner of the kitchen where a black garbage bag sat like a tumor against the white wall. "Your belongings are in here, personal items only. Anything we purchased remains our property." I watched her hands, the same hands that had packed my school lunches, though now I realized she'd only packed the minimum required by state guidelines. The same hands that had signed my report cards, though she'd never asked about my grades beyond whether I was passing. The same hands that had never, not once in 18 years, reached out to comfort me when I was scared or sick or sad. "You have until noon to vacate," Beverly continued, returning to her seat. "That gives you 2 hours and 13 minutes to make arrangements." Harold finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Beverly, maybe we could give him a few days to figure things out." She turned to him with the look that had shut him down 1,000 times before. "The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, Harold. We need to list the room on Craigslist this afternoon. Someone already called about renting it." "You're renting out my room?" The reality was crashing down in waves. "You already have someone lined up?" "It's not your room," Beverly corrected. "It never was. You were a long-term guest whose stay has ended." I stood there in the kitchen where I'd eaten 18 years of meals, staring at these two people who I'd called Mom and Dad, who I'd made Father's Day cards for in elementary school, who I'd tried so hard to make proud. Harold wouldn't look at me. Beverly went back to her calculator, already moving on to other numbers, other calculations, as if dismissing an 18-year investment was just another Tuesday morning transaction. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "I have $47 in my wallet. Where am I supposed to go?" Beverly pulled out a pamphlet from her perfectly organized folder. Of course she had a folder. Of course she'd prepared for this like a business presentation. "There's a shelter downtown. They accept adults 18 and older. The address is highlighted." A homeless shelter. The woman who had raised me since I was 3 months old was handing me directions to a homeless shelter like she was giving me a recipe for lasagna. "Please," I said, and I would hate myself for begging later, but in that moment I was desperate. "Just give me a week, let me figure something out, I'll pay rent." "With what money?" Beverly asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "Your part-time job at that garage. 30 hours a week at minimum wage won't cover market-rate rent." She was right, of course. She was always right about the numbers. I'd been saving for community college, had managed to put away $800 over 2 years. It wouldn't even cover a security deposit anywhere. Harold stood up abruptly, unable to sit with his guilt any longer. "I'm going to work," he mumbled, grabbing his keys off the hook by the door. He paused for just a moment, his hand on the doorknob. "Good luck, Colton." And then he was gone, the sound of his truck starting in the driveway, leaving me alone with Beverly and her calculator and my garbage bag of belongings. "The clock is ticking," Beverly said without looking up. "I have errands to run at 11:30, and I'll be locking the house when I leave." I walked over to the garbage bag, lifted it. It weighed almost nothing. 18 years, and everything I owned fit in a single garbage bag. I looked inside, my clothes, a few books, my toothbrush, the watch my boss at the garage had given me for Christmas. Nothing from Beverly or Harold, no family photos, no keepsakes, no evidence I had ever been part of this family at all. "Was I ever anything to you?" I asked, not really expecting an answer, but needing to ask anyway. "In 18 years, was there ever a moment where you felt something? Anything?" Beverly finally looked at me, really looked at me, and for just a second I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. But then she glanced at her watch, the same efficient gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. "You were a responsibility that we managed successfully. We never hit you, never starved you, never violated the terms of our agreement with the state. That should be enough." But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. And as I stood there holding everything I owned in a garbage bag, about to walk out into a world that suddenly had no place for me, I realized that some people are capable of raising a child for 18 years without ever actually seeing them as anything more than a monthly check. "Goodbye, Beverly," I said, not calling her mom for the first time in my life. She was already back to her numbers, adding up something else, calculating some other transaction in her neat, orderly life that would continue exactly as planned, now that the inconvenience of raising someone else's child was finally over. Growing up in the Reed household in suburban Dallas wasn't perfect, but I thought it was normal. Every family had its quirks, right? That's what I told myself when Beverly would introduce me at her bank functions as Colton, our adopted son, always emphasizing that word, adopted, like she was clarifying I was a rescue dog from the pound. Harold would just nod along, sipping his watered-down beer, never correcting her, never jumping in to say our son was enough. They adopted me when I was 3 months old. I don't know much about the circumstances, just that I was a ward of the state, and they were approved foster-to-adopt parents. Beverly kept the paperwork in a locked filing cabinet in their bedroom. I'd seen her open it twice in 18 years, both times quickly closing it when I walked in, like I'd caught her counting money she didn't want me to know about. Our house was modest but clean, a 3-bedroom ranch with beige walls and beige carpet and beige everything. Beverly believed color was an unnecessary expense. "Neutral tones don't go out of style," she'd say, the same way she'd say, "generic brands have the same ingredients," or "there's no point heating the whole house when sweaters exist." Every decision was filtered through the lens of maximum efficiency, minimum cost. Harold taught me practical things, though I realize now it was probably just to keep me occupied. He showed me how to change oil, rotate tires, fix a leaky faucet, patch drywall. "Man needs to know how to fix things," he'd say, handing me a wrench, but he never let me work on his prized possession, a 1969 Mustang he kept under a cover in the garage. "That's not for kids," he'd say, even when I turned 17 and was hardly a kid anymore. I understand now that I was never going to be old enough because I was never really his. The locked room in our basement should have been my first clue. They said it was just storage, but sometimes I'd hear Beverly down there on the phone, her voice muffled but clearly discussing